Banking bombshell, biggest data leak in history. The so-called Pandora Papers spill the financial secrets of the rich and powerful. Millions of documents point the finger at world leaders and the tax havens they use to stash away their wealth. Also coming up, calling in the army. Military tanker drivers take over fuel deliveries in Britain. Panic buying has caused thousands of petrol stations to run dry. Plus, sensational. 2 California scientists win the Nobel Prize in Medicine for their work on the sense of touch, the greatest award in medical research for unlocking a secret of nature that's crucial to our survival. And still on the air, at least for now. We meet a radio talk show host in Kabul, one of a few dozen women still working as journalists after the Taliban takeover. I'm Layla Haq. Thank you so much for joining us this hour. Well, after the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, another massive data leak has revealed the secret financial dealings of some of the world's richest and most powerful people. The so-called Pandora Papers show how politicians, business tycoons, and celebrities hide their wealth using offshore tax havens. Well, the investigation was carried out by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists with global media partners, including DW. And that's where we begin our coverage.
To Siegfried Beer and his wife, the financial advisor's proposals seemed sound and the investment model wasn't too risky. But when they wanted to cash out their earnings, the money was gone. The same thing happened to thousands of others in a multi-million-dollar fraud involving dubious offshore shell companies.
The offshore
companies are key to making tracing more difficult for everyone involved, especially for investigators.
A massive trove of financial documents, dubbed the Pandora Papers, provides some clues. The dataset consists of around 12 million confidential documents. It allegedly reveals the owners of 27,000 shell companies, including more than 330 politicians, such as the heads of state of Ukraine, Kenya, and Ecuador. The leaked records show that Czech Prime Minister Andrej Babiš also put millions into shell companies to buy a chateau in France. Babiš is suspected of concealing the origin of the money and of tax evasion. He responded to the allegations during an election debate.
I'm being accused of money laundering. Let me clarify. The money came from a Czech bank. It was taxed, it was my money, and it came back to the Czech Republic.
For Babiš, the timing couldn't be worse. He's up for re-election this week.
Well, among the hundreds of politicians named in the Pandora Papers is Kenya's president, Uhuru Kenyatta. While Mr. Kenyatta is alleged to jointly own a secret network of offshore companies with 6 members of his family. While journalists behind the investigation say the family's offshore wealth has grown as Kenyatta has consolidated power. President Kenyatta has just responded, saying the Pandora Papers will make Kenya and the world more transparent. And he's vowed to respond to the allegations about him when he returns home from a trip abroad. Take a listen now to what some Kenyans made of the news.
For us, we are down and we need money. We need to generate our facilities in Kenyans. They are down, no jobs, nothing, and that money is not circulating anymore. So we are in a shock.
It's a sad thing for our country. Our hospitals are not yet equipped when we are in the middle of the pandemic. And most youths are unemployed. So I think the money could have been used to generate income for the youths.
No one will arrest him. No one will question him. They run the game. It's like an emperor. What do you expect?
Some reactions there. Patrick Gitara is a Kenyan political commentator, and he joins us. And now, good to have you with us, Mr. Gitara. Thank you so much for your time. Some responses to the reports that have been revealed today. Were you surprised by these revelations when you read the findings about Mr. Kenyatta and his family using tax havens?
Thanks for having me. I've got to say I wasn't surprised.
And I don't think the value of these reports is that they are surprising. Everybody knows that they have been stashing money abroad for a very long time. We've had numerous reports of this. I think the more important thing for us right now is to look at the mechanisms for how it is actually done and the people who are complicit in it, including companies and countries in the West.
Now, this obviously raises a lot of awkward questions for Mr. Kenyatta, many ethical questions. The optics, clearly bad, but was it illicit? Did he break any laws? Was there a smoking gun in these revelations that you saw?
I think, well, there are questions as to whether he broke laws because Kenyan law requires all state officers to announce when they hold accounts and assets outside the country and to report that to our Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. So it's not clear whether he did it. He's required to also file wealth declarations every 2 years. And these are kept confidential. So unfortunately, we don't know whether he actually listed these assets in his wealth declaration. So there might be questions about whether he complied with the law. But beyond that, this is not just about law. It's about the ethics of it. It's about the perception of people going to great lengths to hide money from the public. So we don't know. We've got in our constitution a requirement that public officers conduct themselves in ways that do not raise suspicions, in ways that don't lead the public to question their integrity. And in the way this has been carried on in the maneuvers to essentially hide the fact that he's the beneficiary of wealth, to create foundations, charitable foundations where he is essentially giving money to himself. This raises questions about whether or not he is behaving ethically.
Now, as we reported moments ago, President Kenyatta says he will respond in due course to these allegations, these revelations made in the Pandora Papers. Should we wait to hear an explanation from him before condemning him?
I'm not sure whether we should. To be quite honest, he has promised many times before that there'd be explanations about how he acquired his wealth, how his family acquired his wealth. In 2018, he promised that we'd get lifestyle audits of both himself, his late father, and his family, and explanations about wealth. In 2013, he promised that he would explain how they came about the huge and massive tracts of land that they have now. And just recently, I think it was about 2 years ago, when he was asked questions about the building of a railway that we've had that's really almost bankrupted the country, he promised he'd give us the contract for it. We've never seen it. So I'm not sure that's actually wise to wait for any sort of explanation coming from him.
Now, in conclusion, Mr. Gitara, Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta is due to leave office next year, I understand. How will these revelations impact his political legacy, in your view?
Well, I think it will just entrench the fact that both the way he has carried on while in power and how he was and his family has acted since independence, that he has been at the head of essentially a looting enterprise. I think many people are going to remember, and this is going to be very embedded in how they remember him, as somebody who came in, spoke all the right words, said all the good things about fighting corruption and transparency and all of that, and did entirely the opposite, presided over the looting of the country. And during his term, he himself, despite being fabulously wealthy, was implicated in schemes essentially that led to lots of Kenyans, the sorts of people you had interviewed before, seeing their homes lost, seeing any chance of having a good life slipping away from them.
Kenyan political commentator Patrick Gitara talking to us from Nairobi, Kenya. Sir, thank you for your time. And we pivot now to Great Britain, where Army truck drivers have begun delivering fuel to gas stations. A lack of civilian drivers has disrupted supplies and triggered panic buying. 200 service personnel are being drafted in. The worst hit areas are London and Southeast England. Retailers have welcomed the intervention, but say it's likely to have limited impact. Tens of thousands more drivers are needed. And it's not just fuel. A severe shortage of labor is straining supply chains across the United Kingdom's economy, including for some foods.
The area Evelyn in South London is one of the most deprived in England. Almost 10% of adults here are out of work. That's why the food bank that opens its doors twice a week is a lifeline for many. Pensioner Lloyd Price is a regular here. He says he often shares the little he has with a family that lives next door.
Times are very hard now with everyone. We were just talking outside just now, and people are saying they're finding it difficult, more difficult on a daily basis. You know, if it hadn't been for the food bank, a lot of people, I don't know what would happen.
But volunteers at the food bank are worried. Christina Norman goes out regularly to collect leftover food from supermarkets. And at the moment, there often is simply not enough for her to take back to the food bank.
There's not that many trucks delivering now. The other day when we came, there wasn't any food. She said to me, all we have is potatoes and eggs.
It's the result of a wider problem with supply chains that's playing out across the country. A shortage of lorry drivers is affecting deliveries, meaning not enough fuel reaching petrol stations and not enough food is reaching those who need it most.
They either get the fuel shortage sorted, or we have more drivers, or you just think to yourself, where are we going to be in 4 weeks' time?
Back at the food bank, they say they only have half as much food compared to a few months ago. But at the same time, more and more people are trying to access their services.
We've had to cap our numbers just because it then starts to affect how much we can give out to our existing members. But it's hard saying no, especially when you've got a family coming to you saying they're in desperate need.
Lloyd Price is grateful for the help he has been receiving. But, like everyone here, he is worried about the hardship that might lie ahead for this community.
I want to bring you up to speed now with some of the other stories making news around the world. Authorities in northern India have suspended internet services after at least 8 people died in protests against agricultural reforms. Farmers' unions say a car carrying a government minister drove into protesters, killing 4 people. The minister says a mob then beat to death his driver and 3 others. An Italian court has suspended proceedings against Carles Puigdemont, the exiled former leader of Catalonia. The court was due to rule on extraditing him to Spain. He's wanted on charges linked to Catalonia's failed independence bid. Well, the judge is now waiting on a decision by the European Court of Justice. New Zealand has abandoned its long-standing strategy of eliminating the coronavirus and will instead aim to live with the virus while rolling out vaccinations. Health officials are struggling to contain a persistent outbreak of the Delta variant. Taliban forces say they have destroyed an Islamic State sleeper cell in the Afghan capital, Kabul. A bomb blast outside a mosque earlier killed at least 5 people. The explosion targeted the funeral of a senior Taliban official's mother. We stay in Afghanistan, where over the past 2 decades, many women worked exceptionally hard to become journalists. And up until August, around 700 women were working as reporters, presenters, or news writers. But since the Taliban took power, that number has dropped to less than 100. While now, women are barely seen in public in Afghanistan, with many journalists stuck at home or in hiding. DW's Nick Conley has been talking to one female journalist in Kabul who is resisting the pressure to give up her career.
A woman's voice on the airwaves. In today's Afghanistan, that's no longer a given. Indeed, in several provinces, it's already a thing of the past. Here in Kabul, Mariam Hatak spends an hour on weekday mornings talking to listeners of her phone-in show, taking music.
A government in turmoil. New South Wales Deputy Premier John Barilaro quits politics just days after the Premier. COVID-19 is seeping deeper into Melbourne's southeast as school students re-enter the classroom and the exam hall. Taiwan asks Australia for help to prepare for war with China. And decision day approaching. England cricket authorities to decide this week whether the Ashes in Australia will go ahead. Hello, I'm Rachel Papazzoni with ABC News. The New South Wales government is in turmoil after Nationals leader and Deputy Premier John Barilaro quit politics. His bombshell resignation follows last week's shock departure of Premier Gladys Berejiklian. The Liberals face a potentially bruising vote to decide the party's next leader. As for Mr Barilaro, he says public life has taken a toll and it's time to go.
The times are uncertain and the government is increasingly unstable. After New South Wales lost its Premier, the Deputy Premier is now pulling the pin.
There is never a right time, but I know as the architect of the roadmap when we get to open up on Monday, I'm confident that this state now has bright days ahead of us.
John Barilaro has been the Deputy Premier and Nationals leader for the past 5 years. He's decided to quit politics altogether.
It has taken a toll. It is tough on anybody in public life to continue in this role, especially under so much scrutiny.
The 49-year-old has been a divisive political figure that at times went rogue. His confrontational style led to a fractious relationship with his coalition partners and almost tore the government apart over koalas.
What was over policy over koalas ended up being a more difficult conversation, a difficult debate that got out of control, and you know, one of my regrets is that we didn't steer that through in a different way.
The man expected to be the next Premier tried to convince his friend and colleague to stay.
A very disappointing day today. John has been a stalwart for rural and regional New South Wales. He's a fighter.
Dominic Perrottet still has a fight on his hands as he attempts to take the top job. Despite factional bosses striking a deal yesterday to shore up his numbers, the other contender, Rob Stokes, is digging in.
I think there could be nothing more appropriate than leaving the choice in the hands of the members of the Parliament who represent the people of New South Wales. I don't think it's appropriate to leave the choice to factional heavyweights.
It means the election of a new leader will go to a secret ballot, and Rob Stokes delivered his pitch to his party for change.
If I'm Premier, I'm committed to significantly increasing representation of women in the senior ranks of the New South Wales Ministry.
While Dominic Perrottet hasn't ruled out speeding up the COVID roadmap.
If I'm successful in that ballot, then I will obviously sit down with the health officials and we'll work through that.
What's transpired within the government over the past 4 days has been nothing short of chaotic. There have now been 3 exits, from Gladys Berejiklian, Andrew Constance and John Barilaro, which means 3 by-elections. So the government, under a new leader, will be tested almost immediately at the polls. And John Barilaro's seat will be the hardest to retain.
John Barilaro has got an 11.6% margin, but he's hugely personally popular and they will lose that personal vote. It's a seat Labor has held many times.
More bad news for a government already in the minority. Ashley Raper, ABC News, Sydney. COVID-19 is seeping deeper into Melbourne's southeastern suburbs, and there are concerns for students as more young people test positive, just as face-to-face learning resumes. 4 more Victorians have died from the disease, 2 women from the Hume area, a man from Manningham and a man from Moreland. 498 Victorians are in hospital. 96 of them are in ICU. There were also 1,300 new cases on Monday. 45% of them are people aged between 10 and 29. Authorities say vaccination rates are seeing figures stabilise in northwest hotspots, but there's a surge in the south.
Exam halls are being prepped. And while a 3-hour test usually fills students with dread after a 4-month delay, for some, it's a delight.
I kind of want to just get it over and done with because it's been pushed back so many times.
She's one of nearly 90,000 students taking the General Achievement Test tomorrow. Despite surging cases, it can't be delayed any longer, with end-of-year exams looming. The government wants students from hotspot LGAs to get a COVID test before the exam. More than 8,000 students have come forward, 33 testing positive.
We may not have found these cases otherwise, so that goes a long way to help us hold the gap as safely as possible tomorrow.
I'm confident Bridie's been tested, she's negative, she's had her 2 vaccines, so I'm thinking I've done everything I can.
COVID positive students will be excused on medical grounds.
Being into the second year of the pandemic now, second GAT that we've had under these circumstances, we're very used to pivoting.
When students return full-time, cases will rise, but the days of closing schools could be over.
We certainly won't have the entire school quarantining for a full 14-day period. There'll be assessments based on vaccination status, noting that kids 12 and above may be partially or fully vaccinated.
Rapid antigen tests could be the answer.
In terms of the value of these tests in this particular situation, it's only more valuable and more useful when there's actually a higher rate of infection. And so I know that the Victorian Government will be piloting this in the high transmission areas. And those high transmission areas are spreading. Of today's new cases, roughly a quarter are in Melbourne's west. In the north, numbers remain high, with 42% of new cases there. But the outbreak is growing in the southeast, where 21% of new cases have been detected. But there are signs the tide could be turning for Melbourne, which has overtaken Buenos Aires as the city to have spent the most time in lockdown.
We have seen some stabilisation in numbers in Hume and in Wyndham. That really is a reflection of the huge increase in vaccination uptake in those local government areas in the last couple of weeks.
Victoria is on schedule to hit 70% double vaccination in 3 weeks' time, which should end Melbourne's lockdown. Dana Morse, ABC News, Melbourne.
Taiwan warns it's preparing for war with China and is urging Australia to increase security cooperation. Beijing intensified its campaign of military intimidation against the self-ruled island at the weekend, sending dozens of jets into its air defence identification zone. Here's Defence correspondent Andrew Green.
For its National Day celebrations, China's taken to the skies to showcase its growing military might. At the same time, the People's Liberation Army has put on another show of force across the Taiwan Strait.
If China is going to launch a war against Taiwan, we will fight to the end.
Since Friday, dozens of Chinese fighter aircraft have flown sorties into what Taiwan claims as its air defence identification zone, prompting the tiny democratic island to scramble its own military and plead for international support.
We would like to engage in security or intelligence exchanges with other like-minded partners, Australia included, so that Taiwan is better prepared.
Any conflict between China and Taiwan would be considered an early test of the Quad strategic grouping and the new AUKUS partnership.
We are pleased to see that the like-minded partners of Taiwan, the United States, and the UK and Australia are working closer with each other.
Our policy is peace, our hope is peace, our belief is that this can be maintained.
While war isn't considered inevitable by military analysts, many believe if China chooses to invade, it'd be difficult to stop.
China has the ability to prevent the United States getting control of the air. If the US doesn't have control of the air, it cannot win either at land or at sea.
Australia does not formally recognise Taiwan diplomatically, instead sticking to the long-standing One China policy. But in recent times, the government has increased cooperation with the small self-governed island. And just last month, it joined the United States in pledging closer ties with Taiwan, which it now calls a critical partner. Andrew Green, ABC News, Canberra.
A bomb blast has killed at least 5 civilians at a Kabul mosque that was holding a memorial service for the mother of the Taliban spokesman. It was the deadliest attack in the Afghan capital since Western forces left the country in August. There was no immediate claim of responsibility, but suspicion fell on Islamic State extremists who have stepped up attacks in recent weeks. Gunfire was later reported on the outskirts of Kabul, where Taliban fighters reportedly launched attacks on suspected IS militant hideouts. There's no pitter of panda cub paws on the horizon, with Adelaide's giant pandas Wang Wang and Funi once again failing to mate. With a panda IVF expert stranded in China due to the pandemic, the pair was encouraged to breed naturally during their season, which lasts just a few days each year. The zoo says while the pandas showed promising signs, it wasn't to be.
Really encouraged. The two pandas definitely have the right idea, but unfortunately at that critical time they couldn't quite get it together at that key moment. So hopefully next year we'll get another chance.
The pandas are back on public display after being given a fortnight of privacy. To sport, and the Panthers have atoned for last year's grand final heartbreak to win their first NRL premiership since 2003 with a 14-12 victory against South Sydney. Brisbane's maiden decider had it all, from big hits, twists and turns to unbelievable tries and even a proposal in a pulsating night for rugby league.
As the saying goes, if at first you don't succeed, try again.
The Panthers celebrate.
After prevailing in a true arm wrestle grand final battle in Brisbane.
We've worked so hard to get here and we finally did it. We climbed Everest.
In front of 39,000 fans at Lang Park who spent all 80 minutes of the decider on the edge of their seats.
Playing for that, the Probyn Summers Trophy.
After a frenetic start to the match, a Panther opened the scoring.
Burton's into a hole.
Minutes later, Rabbitohs playmaker Cody Walker sliced through the defence like he's been doing all year.
He'll go all the way.
Just a penalty goal was the difference at the break. Then, with 15 minutes to go and scores deadlocked, one Panther rose above them all.
There's an intercept for Crichton. Crichton, he's away. Is he away with the premiership?
South Sydney needed a leveller. Enter this year's leading try scorer Alex Johnston.
Here's the try!
All the Rabbitohs needed then was the conversion, the ultimate test for Adam Reynolds' dodgy groin in his final match as a bunny.
The kid from Redfern, it's coming back. No!
9 out of 10 he's going to get that conversion. You go through life, you have regrets and you have disappointments, and this is a disappointment tonight. It's not a regret. Well, I didn't regret anything.
2 points was all Penrith needed to right the wrongs from last year's grand final heartbreak.
I couldn't bear thinking about losing today. Since I was a fan, a player, an assistant coach, a coach, it's probably 45 years never winning a grand final, so I'm going to make this one last.
Capping it off, Ivan presented his son Nathan with the Clive Churchill Medal.
That was completely out of this world. He's still my boy, so.
We knew we had trust in each other and trust in this group that we'd be able to do something special, and we've done it.
The Panthers weren't the only ones to get a ring last night. Brian To'o proposed to his partner after the win.
He said, "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Will you marry me?" I just thought, do my parents know?
A night they'll never forget. Jessica Stewart, ABC News, Brisbane.
England cricket authorities are set to decide this week whether this summer's Ashes in Australia will go ahead, as the series remains in serious doubt. It comes after several English cricketers expressed concerns about the potential quarantine and COVID-19 restrictions they might face in Australia. In a statement, the England Cricket Board says it'll meet later this week to decide whether the conditions are sufficient for the tour to go ahead. It says the board will continue to speak with players to seek feedback and that it remains in regular dialogue with Cricket Australia. And that is ABC News. I'm Rachel Papazoni. Thanks for your company. Bye for now.